Welcome to the fourth webinar on COVID-19 related research financed by the Norwegian Research Council, the Trond Mohn Foundation, and the Norwegian Cancer Society. I am Ole Johan Borge and responsible for health research and innovation in the Research Council. Together with Marianne Minge, head of section for research and innovation at the Norwegian Cancer Society, and Sveinung Hole, the CEO of the Trond Mohn Foundation, we will share this webinar.
The purpose of these webinars is to facilitate COVID-19 collaboration, to learn as much as possible during the ongoing pandemic, and to make us better prepared for future crises.
And today we're glad to be joined by Egil Madsen. Egil holds a PhD in economics from the Norwegian School of Management. He has previously been a professor of economics and head of department at the NTNU. From 2016 to 2020, Egil was deputy governor in Norges Bank with special responsibility for the government pension fund Global. Today he is the CEO of Forte Fondsforvaltning, and now he is here as the head of the Norwegian Corona Commission. Welcome, Egil.
Thank you very much.
This morning we will meet 8 scientists who will present their research. Information about the speakers can be found on the webinar platform. And of course, in these days, the entire seminar will be recorded and made available on the website. After the 3 plenary sessions, there will be parallel sessions where you can talk directly to the speakers and learn even more about their projects. If you have questions to the presenters, you can use the chat and we will do our best to forward them to the speakers. We also encourage you to use the tools available in the conference portal by, for example, contacting people you would like to meet afterwards. Egil, are you looking forward to the presentations and to talk to the researchers?
I very much so, indeed, both as a citizen, but also in particular, as you said, I'm currently heading the commission that looks into the Norwegian authorities' handling of the pandemic in this country. And I guess for me there is the broad topics that are brought up by today's researchers also is a reflection of the broad effects that the pandemic has had on society in general. So I really look forward to learn from the different researchers' field today. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I think it's our pleasure that you are here together with us. Okay, well, let's wait no longer and welcome the first presenter. We all know how important the immune system is to fight disease, and in the first presentation we will hear really fascinating work using advanced artificial intelligence to predict T-cell responses. This work might actually develop into the next generation COVID vaccine. Trevor Clancy is the Chief Scientific Officer at NEC OncoImmunity. He holds a PhD degree in cancer bioinformatics from the University of Oslo and has more than 17 years experience in bioinformatics. Trevor, we are looking forward to your talk. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invite and for the kind introduction. So yeah, I look forward to discuss with you today about our Research Council funded project, an artificial intelligence platform to identify T-cell targets for rapid response tests during pandemics and its application to SARS-CoV-2. Could you move to the next slide, please? But before I discuss our project and its outcome and impact, I would first, by means of introduction, would like to explain a little about who we are. So NEC OncoImmunity is a Norwegian company. We were founded, and I was also one of the co-founders in 2014, when we were known as OncoImmunity OS. And we were founded, driven by our passion and ambition to develop an AI platform to identify vaccine targets that can be used for personalized cancer vaccinations that are driven by the T-cell response to fight cancer. And we always had the ambition to pivot our technology towards infectious diseases. And we took this opportunity during the pandemic outbreak to fast track that process and apply our technology platform to SARS-CoV-2. So we are a Norwegian company, but we were we were acquired by a large Japanese corporation, NEC Corporation, in 2019. NEC Corporation is one of the largest companies in the world with 110,000 employees, over 300 subsidiaries, and with revenues of $25 billion plus per year. And one of the reasons why our acquisition and merger with them was so exciting is because they really have a very pioneering vision that really matches with what we want to do with our technology and platform. NEC have a very pioneering attitude towards drug development. As an IT and AI company, they're one of the largest AI companies in the world. They actually changed their articles of association in 2019 when they acquired us to become a bona fide drug company, which we think is very, very pioneering. With a very long-term perspective on the technology, 120 years old, we think that this is a way of the future, whereby drugs will be driven by identifying the right patient to the right drug and using AI to design that drug. So really think that the AI is a nice platform for that process. So headquartered out of Oslo, Norway, adjacent to the Radium Hospital in the Oslo Cancer Cluster. We are the Center of Science, Innovation and the business unit for this process. And we have very strategic collaborations with the NEC Corporation in various different drug companies such as Transgene and Vaccine doing personalized cancer vaccination. And we also tapped into the very large research profile that is available to us in the NEC Corporation, including in Heidelberg NEC Research Laboratories and Princeton NEC Research Laboratories in America. So a very large global network for our activities and very much centered out of Oslo, Norway. Next slide, please. So going back to our project, so there was two primary objectives to the funded project. First was to develop and commercialize our AI platform that was designed for personalized cancer vaccination to identify optimal T-cell epitopes that can be used to design universal vaccines for SARS-CoV-2 in order to handle the pandemic, and also in general to apply to other infectious diseases in the future. And we also wanted to explore the possibility to develop a T-cell diagnostic, including a universal vaccine, to combat this pandemic using our AI technology. Much of this work has already been published in Nature Scientific Reports, and we are very much looking forward to continue the further development of this project in the future. Next slide, please. Our key partner in this project was the Oslo University Hospital. In particular, we have a collaboration with the Professor Munthe Lab at the Oslo University Hospital. It really was a marriage between two very synergistic technologies in order for us to achieve our ambitions in this project. As I mentioned, we have a best-in-class AI prediction engine, and we have designed this engine to be universal to the entire HLA genetics, or the genetic population of the world's human population. With that in mind, we can develop a particular constellation of vaccine or diagnostic targets that can be agnostic to the HLA genetics of the global population and simulate the response for specific individuals in a digital twin. As I mentioned, NEC is the world leader in AI technologies, and with that in mind, we can tap into very, very unique and world special proprietary AI algorithms in order for us to accelerate the process of our research and discovery. At the Oslo University Hospital, we've tapped into the really fantastic gold standard biobank of COVID-19 convalescent survivor samples. And Professor Munthe's lab is a leading immunological testing facility. And with this infrastructure and competence and very strong scientific talent, it really allows us to tap into their advanced platform to measure the responses to SARS-CoV-2 in a very efficient manner. So it was a very, very nice synergy with the Oslo University Hospital. Next slide, please. What I would like to do here is very briefly explain exactly what our AI technology is predicting in this context. On the right side of this graph, we have a blue circle that represents a T cell. This is a cell that is evolved to remove viruses and cancerous cells from our body. It achieves that by recognizing presented targets of a virus on the surface of a host infected cell. This large gray circle to the left is the host infected cell, a cell that has been infected by, for example, SARS-CoV-2. In order for a T cell to recognize the virus on an infected cell, it needs to have this recognition synapse molecule on steps 6 and 7 in this plot, whereby it recognizes that the cell has been infected by a virus, and then it will proceed to remove the threat and kill the cell. In order for that recognition to occur, a very complex pathway in the cell that is infected needs to take place. This is represented here in steps 1 to 7. And for each of these very complex steps, over the many years of our technology development, we have developed an AI platform that predicts in silico, in seconds or minutes or hours, depending on the quantity of data, one or a combination of these steps in order to identify those targets in a virus or in a malignant cell, or those targets in a virus that can actually be used and recognized by not just the genetics of one individual, but that of the entire human population.
Trevor, there is 1 minute left.
I'll then quickly move to the next slide. Thank you. I won't spend too much time on this slide due to the lack of time, but it really summarizes for us the essence of how we predict hotspots for diagnostics and universal vaccination on SARS-CoV-2. We have used our AI technology to identify those areas in the virus that are more immunogenic, but not just on the spike protein, as our current vaccinations are using, but on the entire real estate of the virus. We then filter for those areas of the virus that are mutating quite rapidly, so that our vaccines and diagnostics are going to be robust to the current and future variants. And this is done for the entire genetics of the human population, because the adaptive immune system driven by the T cells is actually quite specific to every individual. But using our AI platform, we're able to model this and simulate this in a digital twin setting for the entire human population, such that we can have off-the-shelf vaccines that can be applicable to every population in new pandemic outbreaks. Next slide, please. Very quickly, summary of our results. So with Oslo University Hospital, currently I'm going to show you data for 20 recovered survivors of COVID-19. These were patients that had no symptoms. They had symptoms, but did not require hospitalization, meaning that these are really bona fide recoverers of the virus. So they were confirmed to have the virus using PCR, which is a robust assay for confirming evidence of the virus. And we tested the T cell response predicted by our AI technology on the blood from these survivors. And we did not have the HLA genetic background of these survivors. So the AI algorithm was really walking blind. It does not know the HLA genetics of the population. So it really is testing the agnostic nature of the vaccine potentially and the diagnostics, irrespective of any individual in the world's population. Using two thresholds, red the low threshold and a higher threshold, and two different types of assays, we were able to demonstrate that in 100% of the survivors generated an immune response, and 90% of those survivors generated a response that was highly proliferative. So in summary, we got really excellent results, and we look forward to progressing this on more patients in the future with Oslo University Hospital. Next slide, please.
You might want to skip that, Trevor, since we are running out of time.
Yeah, we can deal with this one if we have questions about current and future variants. And I'd like then maybe just summarize in my last slide. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, and so in summary, we have developed an AI platform that rapidly screens pathogens of concern and identifies optimal T cell targets. And we've applied it to SARS-CoV-2 in the current pandemic to identify hotspots for diagnostics for a universal vaccine. So we have identified these targets that are recognized by specific T cells in the human population, and they were identified to be recognized in 100% of convalescent COVID-19 patients at Oslo University Hospital. These represent blueprints of a vaccine design or a diagnostic design that is also robust to the evolving virus for future variants that may occur. And currently, with our infectious disease business unit, we are exploiting this platform with various different partners, including an international pharma company. Thank you very much. Sorry I was over time, and if you have any questions later, I'll be happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Trevor. We're gonna change subject rather dramatically, I think, and that's one of the fascinating things about these webinars is that you can listen to one excellent scientific, biotech, molecular cell biology, IT project in one session, and in the next presentation you're going to have something completely different, which is going to be the case right now. We all know that the working environment is important, but that the working environment has significant impact on how health workers are coping with the pandemic. That was, at least to me, new information. And that is the topic of the next presenter, Synne Øyen Stensland. Synne is a medical doctor with a PhD and is a researcher at the Norwegian Center for Violence and Traumatic Stress Studies at the Oslo University Hospital. Synne, we are all looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much for that kind presentation, Ole Johan. I'll share my screen. Can you all see that clearly?
Looks fine.
Okay, great. So I'll tell you about stress reactions and health problems in hospital personnel during the COVID-19 pandemic, based on preliminary findings from a longitudinal study where we follow hospital personnel from 4 of our largest university hospitals through the first 3 waves of the pandemic. So let's see if I can even switch slide. I can. Extensive efforts from the project group, partners and health personnel at the 4 hospitals have made this study possible. Well, we've all seen the news. Health personnel are our most vital resource for ensuring an effective crisis response and good health for all. For 2 years, the pandemic has heavily burdened services. Nevertheless, we lack knowledge about how hospitals can best help their personnel stay healthy through this and future crises. In this study, we aim to identify work-related factors of importance to the health of hospital personnel as potential targets for interventions to come. The study follows an in vivo design where data collections were planned and carried out in relation to the waves of infection. And just before the weekend, we got the good news that the Norwegian Health Directorate will help finance the 4th data collection in connection to the 4th wave. And the hospitals are ready and will start next week. So that's a happy thing. We developed online questionnaires in close collaboration with personnel in collaborating hospitals to capture the important work-related factors for health throughout the pandemic. Among the almost 2,000 health personnel participating in the study, 2/3 worked with patients with suspected or confirmed COVID-19 infection. Of about 50% worked with seriously ill in intermediate or intensive care units. In this study, we asked all participants to describe what they were most proud of having achieved at work in the last 2 weeks. Participants emphasized that they were proud of being able to contribute to society, learn, adapt, and work steadfastly to provide high-quality treatment and care to patients, build preparedness and efficiency in the organization, and contribute to a collegial unity and support in times of crisis. The more than 1,000 analyzed responses communicated a genuine drive to stay in practice through the crisis, often despite very challenging working conditions. Maintaining one's own health under high work-related stress stood out as a recurring theme. Some reported angers, others felt no pride. In the study, participants shared their experiences. I've rarely been more tired after the shifts. have worked for almost 35 years in intensive care units. The idea that this will last a long time is almost unbearable. Many reported significant health problems. 16 to 20% had high or very high levels of somatic health problems, such as headaches, backaches, pain in the neck, arms and legs. Approximately 20% reported significant anxiety or depressive symptoms, and 8% met 3 or 4 out of 4 PTSD criteria, indicating significant clinical symptoms. And almost 1 in 6 reported symptoms of burnout. As I told you previously, we were looking for important work-related factors for hospital personnel's health through the pandemic. Analysis of over 2,500 responses revealed 8 key factors. It's all about sufficient competency to be able to perform work tasks, predictability in teams and work environment, access to necessary user-friendly personal protective equipment, access to information, help, and support for stress management, a manageable workload, safety for personnel, to be part of a supportive social environment, and to be able to provide patients with necessary treatment and care. Among these factors, personnel reported the highest achievement of good practice and social support, and by far the lowest access to work-related stress management. Being infected with COVID-19 in the early stages of the pandemic and experiencing severe COVID-19 infection in a close colleague, family, or friend was associated with an increased risk of PTSD and psychological distress. Hospital personnel in contact with patients with suspected or diagnosed COVID-19 infection more often reported insufficient competency, lack of predictability and structure, problems related to the use of personal protective equipment, overwhelming workloads, and lack of safety, as compared to colleagues who were not involved in such work. Personnel involved in the treatment of seriously ill COVID-19 patients had a particularly high risk of experiencing more unfavorable outcomes. At the moment, there is an urgent need for hospitals to effectively buffer the negative consequences of the pandemic by proactively building healthy work environments for employees. Interventions must ensure adequate competency in teams, predictability, access to necessary user-friendly personal protective equipment, adequate help for stress management, manageable work tasks and a workload, safety and supportive social environments to facilitate best practice. Personnel with significant health problems must also be identified for hospitals to provide sufficient need-based help and support. Some will need treatment. Finally, I'd like to thank all of the health personnel for your efforts and participation in the study. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Synne. Egil, I'd like to start with you. I mean, you have been listening to both of these 2 talks. Any immediate comments?
First of all, it's very impressive work, both of them. I think that's my most immediate and most important comment. And secondly, I think this shows in our evaluation in the commission that I'm leading, we are in addition to looking into what the Norwegian authorities have done exactly, we are also given the task of giving recommendation for handling a similar crisis in the future. And I think what these 2 presentations shows that has to be on a broad spectrum. I mean, what Trevor demonstrated, although I must say I don't grasp the full depth of that. That's let me admit that up front. But what it shows is that how fast can we really get vaccines for immunizing the population also in future crises? That has really been the exit strategy for coming out of this pandemic this time is to vaccinate the population. But how fast can we do that? And I think that the research of Trevor and his colleagues is poised in that direction. For Synne's very, I would say, quite sobering findings of the working conditions on our health personnel that has been most involved in treating COVID patients. This echoes some of the findings that we have seen in our own evaluation. And it underlines to me that there are capacity issues here that needs to be looked at in the intensive care units in Norwegian hospitals. But it also shows that if people working under such stressful, psychological stressful and physiological stressful conditions over time, you really need to have a system also for taking care of them once they are coming out of this. So that was very interesting, but also quite sobering, I think. So those are some initial thoughts. Thank you, Ole.
No, thank you. Trevor, you had to skip one of your slides there. I think that slide did mention something about Omicron. So the question, does your initial finding also hold up or holds when it comes to Omicron, since Omicron has mutated fairly heavily, at least from when you start and compare with the Wuhan variant of the virus?
Yes, that is correct. So what that data showed was, and we had the opportunity to analyze this as soon as before Christmas, and the genome is sequenced for Omicron, and with AI we were able to screen the virus within minutes and hours and identify those areas in the virus that can still hold protection against the T-cell arm of our immune system. And what we found was that for the most part, there is not a loss of T-cell protection for most of the HLA genetics of the human population for the Omicron variant, even though it has many of these mutations. The same cannot be said for the antibody responses. This is emerging from the literature, but it seems like the T-cell arm of the immune system is robust.
Oh, is it one more question before I turn to Synne? What you are developing or identifying is T-cell targets. And of course, those targets has to be transferred into a vaccine, a T-cell vaccine. What is in brief, what is the standing on T-cell vaccines compared to the kind of the vaccines that we are taking in the population today?
T-cell vaccines are far behind the classical antibody vaccines across all diseases. However, there are some T-cell vaccines that are currently being profiled in cancers, in late-stage cancers, and we're also involved in those projects. But we do think that it's too early stage to launch a T-cell vaccine right now. We need to complete clinical trials. But one important thing, which is an outcome of our project, what it demonstrates is that in order to develop a T-cell vaccine, you need to profile it for the specific genetics of the human population, every individual, and all of the molecular profile of the pathogen in question. Classically, if you do that with laboratory assays, it could take years or decades. But with AI, we're able to do this in a very, very short time frame and shave years off of the development process. But still, we need to go through the clinical trial process for T-cell vaccines before they are approved. But I think this is a nice way for us to really emphasize that if we continue this line of research, we can be ready for T-cell vaccines in the next grand pandemic in 5 to 10 years' time.
And of course, being a biologist, it's really fascinating to see that you generate data that is being published in Nature within just a few months after the start of the pandemic. So that's fascinating. Synne, the numbers you got regarding negative health symptoms on the health workers, that is not very optimistic reading. However, did you also measure the situation before the pandemic? So you had kind of a baseline to see the increase in the stress on the health workers?
Yeah, I guess that's every researcher's dream. But we set out and applied for research money in the Easter of 2020, right after the onset of the pandemic. So we started from T1, which we are quite proud of. That said, we have set the cutoffs for those health complaints quite high to be able to measure health problems of clinical significance. And when we compare those to prior data, we find that they are fairly in the higher range. And that said, it's also important to take in that when one of 5 out of highly competent hospital personnel are having severe health problems, that's something that we should really consider how we can deal with that to keep those in health, because they are, as we all know by now, our most vital resource for sustainable healthcare.
I presume there are some health leaders watching this webinar as we speak. You describe that the best medicine to handle stress in the healthcare system is to have a good working environment and good working conditions. What would you kind of prescribe and suggest for the health leaders to do with their working environment to be able to be better, better protected against the negative stress that their workers experience during such a situation?
Thanks for that question. I think the work environment, it couldn't be emphasized more how important that is. And as mentioned earlier here, capacity is really something very important to look into, and it certainly seems to need to be strengthened, especially so in intermediate and intensive care units. And I guess what I tried to point to earlier is that having a healthy work environment really needs to really need to look at competency in teams, predictability, access to necessary personal protection, and to help employees handle stress throughout the pandemic. And also, most of all, the manageable work tasks and workload and safety. These are really things that need to be addressed.
Thank you. Egil, some final comments before we move on to the next session?
Yeah, well, just quickly, I'll sit here in my office at home. I'm reflecting on the fact that both of these research projects are examples of research that is directly relevant for the crisis that we are still grappling with, but also for any future pandemics that, the experts say that we can expect, be that next year or in 50 years, we don't know, but it will come someday. And these projects are also very relevant when thinking about how to prepare for future crises. Again, very, very impressive work. Thank you for having me to listen. I really enjoyed it.
Sveinung, I leave the word to you.
And thank you very much for that great session. So let's move on to session number 2, which consists of 3 innovation projects. First up is Jørgen Aarhaug. He has looked into our transport system, which has thoroughly been rattled in the middle of its own transition towards sustainability. Jørgen is the PI of the project Adaptive Measures for Non-Private Transport to the COVID-19 Pandemic. Jørgen works as a senior researcher at the Institute of Transport Economics in Oslo. Jørgen, we're looking forward to your presentation, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, good. Well, first of all, this project focuses on how non-private transport is affected by the pandemic. We use the term non-private as a common term for all shared modes. That includes public transport, taxis, car sharing, e-scooters, city bikes, and so on. It excludes traveling with your own car, walking, cycling, and using your own bicycle. So, the interaction between the pandemic and non-private transport is interesting. Mainly, of course, it's interesting by itself, but it's also extremely interesting given that there is ongoing sustainability transition, in particular in urban mobility. That is to say, a transition away from the private car as the main mode of transport. And we know that this process is going to be affected by the pandemic. As you all know, private secluded transport is more comfortable when there is a risk of contamination. But we don't know how and how much. We know that people travel less and differently, but we don't know to what extent those habits are going to stick. So, in addition to being a sector for interaction, the transport sector is a huge source of employment, with about 12% of the labor market. That makes it also interesting to study. So we've divided this study into 3 questions. The first one is, how should we change our use of public transport as a result of the pandemic? Then, how is the pandemic influencing the transport sector as a labor market? And then, how is the pandemic changing our attitudes towards sharing within mobility? On the second question, there is a large number of observations as it is a huge source of employment. It gives us a possibility to get insights on how different outcomes with respect to supporting mechanisms have been working. But in this presentation, I'm going to focus on the results from our early phases in the project. That means I will not present the e-scooters and car sharing stuff, which is ongoing work, and we hope to see some results on that before Easter. So the first part of the project has very much been to support the policies towards public transport in the early phases of the pandemic with modeling. So it is to look into how contamination influences the disutility of traveling with public transport. It is a modeling exercise, but it has very practical implications. In line with conventional models, we tend to use a 4-step approach. The basic steps is that we try to estimate the expected infectiousness per passenger, expect the risk of getting infected on board, the probability of different health outcomes from being affected, and then we monetize the health outcomes, meaning that death is highly valued, and the cost for the healthcare system is also added into the equation. So the outcomes matter on. Of course, there is a lot of uncertainty in this, and we make simulations with different assumptions. And I will present 2 illustrations of this now. First, it is the marginal expected external cost of COVID crowding for a 15-minute public transport trip. This shows the spread of our estimates. Average is about 1 kroner, with the minimum of close to 0 and the maximum of close to 5. This is based on data from autumn 2020, and it shows that, well, to put it into perspective, a disutility of such a trip will be about 50 to 60 kroners, and adding 1 kroner on average to that, well, it is a disutility, it matters, but it's not huge. The interesting thing is the spread is huge. And also when we enter other assumptions, in particular changes the R number, which is we take as an external input in our models, you can get a compound effect, and you can get a 100-fold increase in the disutilities, meaning that it, from being marginal, interesting, it matters, to becoming a huge problem. Also, with the conventional, quite conservative situation of autumn 2020, this figure illustrates how crowding affects the disutility. So what the pandemic does is that it increases the disutility of crowding. And we see that occupation rate matters. Again, the more crowding, the higher cost per trip. Some parametric combinations gives very low results. Again, there is a long tail behind. It's highly sensible to the R numbers, but they have proved quite useful, the model estimates. It is also, this modeling exercises is also forming the backbone of 2 academic papers that we are publishing presently. Our second line of inquiry focuses on labor, and what we see—
1 minute left, approximately.
Yep, is that the number of bankruptcies has been extremely low in 2020. We also from the data see that some of the risks within transport seem to be shifting from companies to the employees, and that firms operating on public contracts, like bus companies, have received less loss in revenue and have had better access to government supporting schemes as opposed to firms operating in the private market. And finally, on our changing habits, this is just a note, what we see so far illustrates that even when almost all restrictions were removed in the autumn of 2021, and we've been traveling less and differently. And what we see is that the effect has been strongest on public transport. So the observed or the perceived disutility is higher than the model disutility. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jørgen. Thank you. And our next presenter is Stig Erik Jacobsen. He's the head of Center and Professor in Innovation Studies at the Moon Center for Innovation and Regional Development at HUL, Western Norway's University of Applied Sciences. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of Bergen. Stig Erik will present his project, Regional Resilience and Sustainable Industrial Restructuring. So it's lots of innovation responses to see, and interesting to see how far the innovation goes and how much it sticks. This is at the core of much of what we're interested in. So please, Stig Erik, the word is yours.
Okay, thank you. I hope that you see my slides and you also hear me well.
That's fine.
Okay. Thanks for the invitation and also for this kind introduction. So this is a project with focus on regional resilience and sustainable industrial restructuring. The objective of the project is to investigate the economic consequences of COVID-19 and associated support measures taken by political authorities. So that is what is going to be the emphasis in this project that is still ongoing when it comes to data collection and when it comes to analysis. And the overall objective is to map and explain the uneven economic resilience of industries and regions to COVID-19. And there's several both Norwegian partners and international experts involved in this project. What we do in this presentation is to introduce some of the key analytical concepts that we are going to use, and also illustrate these concepts, the use of the concept through some empirical examples from our data collection and our analysis that is ongoing. So this is about economic resilience, and we define economic resilience as the capacity of actors to cope with and recover from shocks. And we look upon COVID-19 as kind of an external shock to the economy. You can look at resilience on different levels, but we focus on the firm, industries, and regions. And to understand economic resilience, that you have to look into the impact of a shock, and our anticipation is that this impact will vary between industries and also maybe between regions. And secondly, we also have to look into the responses to an external shock, and this also will, of course, vary. And we also think that it will involve both continuity or stability in innovation practice, but also changes. So certain strategies and practices may change, while others are preserved as a response to this COVID-19 situation. I just have to say that originally our intention was to compare the situation before COVID with the situation after COVID. But as you all know, this has become difficult since this pandemic has been lasting much longer than we anticipated. And it's still ongoing. So that means that we also have, what we have decided to do is to have a stronger focus on the responses to an ongoing pandemic. And when it comes to responses, we have developed based on theory on especially evolutionary thinking and sustainable transition studies. We have developed 3 ideal types of COVID-19 responses. The first one is resilient as bounce back. This is more or less like firms are recovering from a shock, they are reworking, they're adapting some of their existing strategies. There will be some incremental innovation, for instance, related to cost reduction and that kind of issues. But it's very much about recovering. And the second one we call resilient as bounce forward. And this is much more about using this crisis to further develop the firm and industry. So this is about moving forward, introduction of new strategies, new processes, new products, new networks, new markets, and so on. So in altogether, this kind of responses is about strengthening the innovativeness and also the competitiveness of firms and making them more economical, robust. And then we have the third alternative, which we call resilient as bounce beyond. And this is also moving forward as a response to the crisis, but this is moving forward with directionality. And directionality is linked to trying to use this crisis to develop more environmentally sustainable and also more socially inclusive activities. So of course, if you have this kind of responses, then you will see a lot of green product and process innovations. Okay, then I will give some empirical examples on how we have used this analytical framework just to illustrate it. As I said, our data collection is still ongoing. We're using both quantitative data and qualitative data, different sets of data that we're going to look into. We have done a survey among firms in Norway, and we also have several case studies ongoing of selected industries and also selected regions and selected policy initiatives. And I will give a couple of examples. Okay, we have a survey, we did a survey in May, June 2021 among firms in Norway. We have a response from 600 firms in 3 different main sectors. And this was about 1 year into the pandemic. And some of the questions that we put forward was to try to map how firms, or try to map the impact of COVID-19 on firms. And of course, you can see that it has a strong impact on the turnover of firms. Many of the firms have got their turnover reduced due to COVID-19. And especially, and that is not very surprising, that especially the impact has been very strong and very negative for the hospitality, tourism, and culture industry. And And you also see some negative effect when it comes to profit, profit, and of course COVID-19 also influenced the profit on firms. And then we also try to operationalize these three concepts of bounce back and bounce forward and bounce beyond. And we asked the firms about the responses to this ongoing crisis. And the overall message in this table is that there is more bouncing back than bouncing forward and bouncing beyond. And that maybe that's not a big surprise, but anyways, it's nice just to observe this. And when it comes to bouncing back, one of the main response from the firms, and that is also not very surprising, is that they have digitalize some of their existing activities, and it's also about maintaining existing networks, about cost reduction and that kind of issues. Right? Bounce forward, on the other hand, is more about introducing new innovation and moving the firm forward. And we also see some examples of bounce beyond. And next step for us will be to try to do more. This is of course the descriptive statistics, and we have an intention of doing more advanced statistical analysis to try to look for significance, and also try to explain why some firms are responding in have one type of response and other firms have another type of response. So trying to explain the reason for firms' responses. Moreover, we also, so as I said, we are using a combination of quantitative and qualitative data, and we are looking into several industry sectors in Norway. I'm just going to give two brief examples, just also to illustrate that the industry has been hit differently by this COVID-19 pandemic. Tourism in Western Norway, and tourism is one of the sector that has been hardest hit by this pandemic. There's been a high reduction in numbers of employees. There's also been a high reduction of numbers of guest nights, especially from foreigners, due to travel restrictions and so on. And when we talk with the firms, we can observe several adjustments, both short-term adjustment, also what seems to be more potential long-term effects. Short-term adjustment is that they have an increased focus on the Norwegian market. There is also, I think that is good, there is more focus on green tourism, short distance customers, and also trying to make them stay longer, and there's also more digital marketing can be observed. When it comes to the long-term effect, we can see that several of the small firms are satisfied with more focus on the Norwegian market, and we also see the developing of new niches is ongoing, hiking, guiding, food tasting, and so on. But for the large firms or the large actors in the industry, it's not enough to only focus on the Norwegian market. So that could be a challenge in the future. So overall, we can observe this combination of bouncing forward and bouncing beyond. Finally, we have this example from Norwegian salmon production, and as many other activities within the food sector, they have been doing well during the pandemic, and that is also the case for the Norwegian salmon production. As you can see, the export value have risen, and 2021 was an all-time high for the industry. But still, they have done some adjustment to this pandemic or to this situation. Short-time adjustment is about more digital communication. There have also been some changes in the market. The restaurant market has been reduced during the pandemic, and they have managed to focus more on private consumers and tailoring product for the private market. There's also been some logistical challenges for the industry, but this is an industry that I experienced with market that are disappearing and changing. So I think they are quite good fit to handle these kind of market challenges. Finally, they also responded it's more difficult to practice open innovation due to the pandemic restrictions. Potential long-term effects, we think that firms need to increase their competence to cope with the more long-term innovation or sustainability challenges of this industry that is about moving forward. And and developing more advanced production technology and reduce the negative environmental impact from the industry. So this overall, we can see a strong focus on bounce back and making the actor more robust within the Norwegian salmon production. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Stig-Erik. Now we look forward to hearing Mona Solvold. She's an associate professor at the BI, Norwegian School of Management. She's looking into the media, and media is both an important actor to succeed with the pandemic restrictions and also being affected by the restrictions themselves. Mona will present her project Media Innovation Through the Corona Crisis, how new media can build and implement innovation ability. Please, Mona, the word is yours.
Okay, thank you, Sveinung. Can you hear me all right?
That's fine, and we can see the presentation.
Can you see the slides? Yes, good. This project is a collaboration between BI, Norwegian Business School, Oslo Met, Campus Christiania, the Norwegian Media Authority, Institute for Journalism, and Kantar. So there's a lot of people and a lot of projects. One of the projects focus on media coverage of the COVID-19 in 2020. We have analyzed 3,000 units of debate and news programs in radio and television, and we collected but not yet analyzed 2,000 items from online newspapers. What we've done is to perform content analysis of frames, sources, tone of voice, and topics. And to have a quick look at some of the main results, we can see that the use of standard frames, that is, when media focus on responsibility, conflict, speculation, and human interest, were hardly used at all in the debate and news programs on radio and television. Debate programs focus to a large degree on response frames. That is how government, both national and local, responded to the crisis, also how health system and legislation, and also the collective efforts in terms of dugnad. News programs on radio and television focus more on what we call pandemic frames, that is to focus on the actually medical risk, the social risk behavior, and illness mortality rates. Both types of programs focused equally on what we call consequences frames. That is, first of all, social consequences, but also economic consequences and cultural consequences. In this study, in the project, we also used two surveys. One based on TNS Kantar about trust in different news media, and the other survey was a three-way survey data from 2016, 2018, and 2020 about news media use before and during pandemic. And both of these studies show that there's an increased use of and trust in news media during the first year of the corona crisis. This is probably a terrible,
Mona, I'm sorry, but are you moving your presentation forward? We're still viewing your first slide.
Oh, sorry. Can't you see it?
Yes, but we're still seeing your introductory slide.
Oh, that's bad. Let's see. What about if I move here?
Yes, that's fine.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay. Let's skip. I was here about demographic differences in trust for media brands. And it's probably not a big surprise that NRK and TV2 have high trust in the population. And media in Norway is generally high trusted society. What's more interesting is these alternative news media, that 13% of the population actually trust types like Reset and Document NO. And you can see there's some differences between gender. Men tend to trust these news media sources more than women. And there's a quite difference between types of age groups. 30 to 44 years old trust these news media more than others. And there's also quite a difference between educational level. I'm not quite sure whether 13% that trust alternative news media is a big problem, but I think it's slightly worrying. We also done some case studies in this project. One of the case studies was the use of big data in investigating journalism. And we interviewed 20 journalists, managers and developers in VG about their Corona special, the COVID-19 live tracker, it's called in English. And this quote from one of our informants is quite descriptive of the case study. The news editor says that it is a love story between our breaking journalists and the editorial developers. This is an innovation that started on the ground level in the newsroom when people from different areas talked to each other and came up with an idea that responds to a consumer need in a very special way. So the case study focused on collaboration, autonomy, and user-driven innovation, and they found that interdisciplinary collaboration accelerated quite a lot during the first 6 months of the project, with high degree of experiments. And as the Corona special group, the people working with this live tracker, expanded from 4 to 30 members, it also helped developing the routines and spreading the practices of these new types of journalism. It's highly relying on distributed autonomy, but this is not something new for VG. They always do this when they're working with a crisis. And one of the things that happens is that the management steps back, taking a supporting role, while the journalists and the developers perform bottom-up innovation. And it's highly user-driven. They're very aware of what are the needs and wants from the audience. Two other case studies is from Amedia and Polaris, where we also did 20 in-depth interviews. In these case studies, we focus on the relationship between innovation capacity and ability. And we use this innovation triangle that some of our team members developed. These data have not yet been analyzed, but some key observations is that also local news organizations, also the small newspapers, not just VG, but small local newspapers, have developed new Corona-specific services aiming at providing new and improved customer experiences. And these new and improved customer experiences, they were mostly based on existing technology, which they simply combined and applied in a new way. The findings on technology and people resources suggest that local newspapers did not invest more in these capacities during the Corona. They just played along with the resources they already had. Finally, we had a type of mapping study. We tried to map different types of innovations taking place within the media, and we had open questions about just what kind of types of innovation did you perform in 2020. This was a short interviews with 30 different news media. And as you can see, they have quite a lot of product innovation and process innovation, but less of the other types. And we will try to repeat this mapping in this year, January, February, to see what happened with the product innovation they did last year. Is there any movements? Have they disappeared? Have they come up with some new stuff? To sum up, we've been working on this for 1 year, and we got 1 year left. So at halftime, we might see that the media has already won the crisis. They provided a balanced coverage of the COVID-19, at least in the news and debate programs, and at least in 2020. Perhaps we need to look at 2021 to see if there's some differences there. We see that there's been an increased use and trust in news media during the first year of the Corona crisis. This, I suspect, haven't gone the same way in 2021 and perhaps not in 2022. We see that people are a bit fed up by Corona. But lastly, the Corona crisis have accelerated the digitalization and innovation processes in most media houses, both the small ones, but also the large ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mona. Very interesting. And now let's invite Egil to join us. Egil, you have been listening to these 3 presentations. I will do like Ole Johan and ask you for your immediate reflections. Is this relevant?
Oh, absolutely. I guess we have now moved to the social sciences in a sense, but still also it's interesting to see how quickly also that part of the research community has responded to the crisis and look at this as sort of a natural experiment or a quasi-natural experiment for testing some of the hypotheses that are around in social sciences. I guess as one reflection to the 2 first ones that are of economic consequences is, yes, the consequences were dramatic for many businesses, including transportation and tourism. But you could also see that I guess, turn it around and say that, wow, they managed very well. You know, the whole market collapsed for both of these sectors almost overnight. But still, a lot of them are around. And I noted in particular, although this is known from other studies also, from Jørgen's study, that the number of bankruptcies in transportation is actually record low through 2020 without a market, which says something about the amount of public support for many businesses, I think. And that raises the question, I guess, that's somewhat more of food for thought, perhaps. But are these government support packages, are they stopping a change or an innovation that would have happened as a consequence of the pandemic, or also as a consequence of dynamics that were there prior to the pandemic? Because if you support all type of businesses, then no one disappears, and it's more difficult to new one to enter also to different markets. And in particular, I noticed from the tourism, or not the tourism, that's not fair to say, but from Stig Erik's paper, that this bounds beyond the concept that I haven't heard about before. That's kind of interesting in the sense that it's an innovation that looks into the future, that we know that need to be different in terms of sustainability and our energy use. And it would also be interesting to know if the pandemic has been a accelerator to that, or whether it has slowed us down. I think that's it's interesting for the future to get more insight into. I would also like to, if I may, add a few comments to Mona's presentation that I thought was very interesting indeed. And it's very interesting to see that the trust among the Norwegian population in general, not for all groups or all ages, but in general that is very high. And as Sveinung said when he introduced this introduction, the communication from the government, from authorities, has been, not only has it been as a response to a great information need from the population at large, but also it has been one tool that the government has used to handle the pandemic, because they want us to change our behavior. And how can they do that? Well, they can do it through incentives such as prices, but they can also do it by telling us what to do and not to do, perhaps in particular the last not to do. And to do that through the media, I think it has been vital that the population in general has a high level of trust in what the media actually conveys, and it's very interesting to see from Mona's work. I think that this level of trust is very high in Norway. One can at least speculate that also has something to do that the outcome of the pandemic in Norway is good compared to most other countries. So very interesting. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Egil. Those were some really interesting points. And let me pick up on one of the points to both Jørgen and actually to all 3 of you. I've seen, we can see from what you presented that it's very descriptive at this point, because you're not through with your analysis and have come to the so what's. And from this we can easily see that. But although Stig-Erik, let me ask you, does Egil have a good point there in the risk of all the government interactions hindering the natural development and innovation that we need in order to transition our industries and adapt to sustainability and bones beyond in a broad sense?
Yeah, I think you have a very good point, because I think that is maybe some of the challenges with this government support to this crisis, is that maybe there's been too much direct support and just to kind of handle or to adapt to the crisis in the short term. So I think and it has also been very generic. It's been for all sectors. Now it seems to be a little bit more target more recently, but I think there is a challenge here, and you should. From an economical perspective, you should be careful with that type of direct support. And I think maybe, I'm not sure if we can say it's so strong, but maybe it could also be a missed opportunity to move the economy in the right direction, especially when it comes to sustainability. So I think. Of course, that is difficult, and then you have to kind of have a type of tag to this support, and you have to direct it towards more sustainability practice and this bouncing beyond. But I think maybe the way forward can be that more of this support is directed through the existing innovation infrastructure. For instance, using more the Research Council, use more the Innovation Norway, use also the regional innovation infrastructure, and to get a support that is more oriented to moving forward. So I think Egil has a very good point, and I think there is a need for a discussion of how this support in Norway has been organized. And I also have maybe it have been an obstacle for some of this green transition that was ongoing, very strongly ongoing before the pandemic. So, and I think that is also something that we see, for instance, if I just could follow up, we see, for instance, in my region, in Western Norway, there was a lot of good initiative going on where the suppliers of oil and gas was moving into green markets, moving into offshore wind, moving into hydrogen and so on. And then you have this recovery packet for the oil sector, and some of this seemed to have stopped up. So yeah, I think it's a good point that we need to discuss this, how to better tune this public support.
Yes, in the middle of an acute situation, lots of factors there. Mona, please.
Yeah, I just want to say that for the media industries, this Corona support has been very helpful for the smallest news media. If we want to keep media diversity, if you want to keep all these local newspapers that we have in every little village in islands, which is quite special for Norway, then I think quite a lot of them do depend on the special Corona help, because they lost advertising. And media always relied on two types of sources. The one is income from subscribers. They actually increased that part of their income, but they also rely on advertising, and that source has completely dried up during the Corona, and they do struggle a lot with income in these days.
Yes, thank you. Jørgen, I would like to ask you a bit different question. I was very intrigued by your analysis of the marginal cost of 15 minutes analysis. And if I understood you right, this was a request coming in the middle of or in the start of the pandemic to help support decisions. Is that right? And if it is, I would like to hear, did your analysis, was it put to use in some way, and how was that process? I mean, it's not often that a researcher is being thrown into the middle of a crisis management like this.
Well, first of all, yes, it was used, and that's also why it was very interesting to start working with it. We started working with that immediately because we had a request, not me personally, but the modeling section here, had a request to help FOE in that work, and it was put to use. And what we did was we added different components to our simplified transport models. So we changed the models so that we could do other analysis, and it was put to use. It was very interesting. And it was also very interesting because some of that was used to the first round of Smittesporing, the app, which wasn't all that successful, but it was interesting work for our part. Well, yes, so that component of the project became much more hands-on than what we expected when we wrote the proposal.
Yeah. Thank you. A last question it's a reflection on your use of terms from theory and your practice, Stig Erik. You're using the terms bounce back, bounce forward, and bounce beyond. And having pondered this, I must say it resonates in a much broader context than just the pandemic. Industries are faced with lots of changes and need to innovate. And would you say that are these terms more general applicable to innovation? I mean, technology, climate, hitting industries? Yeah, I think you're muted.
Originally, at least the concept of bounce back and bounce forward is related to theory on resilience and on shock to the economy. And this concept of bounce beyond is something that we have developed based on our on thinking from sustainable transition theory. So this is a kind of a new concept that we try to further develop. But I think especially when you are in a situation where this is the situation for Norway, where you need this green restructuring of the economy, then I think those kind of concepts can be useful, especially if you also come to the support scheme of national government, if they only should support innovation or if they should only support green innovation. So I think you also can use it when an economy need a kind of transformation, which is in fact the case for the Norwegian economy at the moment.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, we have to move on, and I'd like to invite Ole Johan and Marianne and Egil to talk about what we've just been through, and we'll also have a look at the chat to see if there are any questions there. Let me start off by asking you, Egil, now after one corona report, almost two corona reports, hopefully, investigating government actions and consequences, what are your thoughts and learnings regarding the usefulness in general of concurrent research in a crisis like this?
Well, to be a bit blunt, I think we've been absolutely helpless without it. So if there's anything that this pandemic has learned us is how dependent modern society is of good quality research, also in crisis management. So I think that's one way to put it. I think another way that struck me at least, and I think that this conference demonstrates it very clearly, is as I referred to also earlier today, the seriousness, finally, I would say, of research across different fields. You know, in the research community, that's also been sort of almost a slogan that's important. But what the crisis has shown is that it is important. It's absolutely vital. To take one example, the consequences for society and the economy of different measures to handle the pandemic, not only for the health and mortality of the people, but for society in general, A good understanding of that, it requires that there are more people than doctors and biologists involved in crisis management. To give one example, another example could be that that goes the other way. That at the outset of the pandemic, many social scientists, certainly economists, believe that there was perhaps a clear trade-off between having the economy open and keeping the level of illness in society at a low level. Turned out that there was a false trade-off, and that is also better for the economy to keep the pandemic under control, at least in certain cases. It's not necessarily the case today, but it was the case at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think that was, how did we learn that? Well, we learned it from listening to the experts in medicine and biology. So that's in terms of the research and what we can learn from that. It's absolutely vital. We would not have. I don't know where we would be without research and the research communities. I don't dare think about it, to be honest. But also in terms of the importance of different research communities communicating and sometimes collaborating with each other. I think that's certainly two takeaways from my part.
Thank you. So as sponsors of this, we're totally in the clear sponsoring research in a crisis. Before I hand over to Ole Johan maybe, and then Marianne, just one more reflection, and that is turning a bit to the more optimistic side. This pandemic has also brought out the best in us in a way. Lots of examples of innovation and new behavior has happened during the pandemic. And from your perspective, having insights, much broader insights than we do, any reflections on how we can encourage this good innovation behavior to stay with us to fight other challenges? Egil?
Oh, that's a big question, but you know, it's difficult not to think about the transition to a more sustainable energy system and a more sustainable economy. I'm speculating a bit now, but the pandemic showed that the government is willing, and the population, at least in broad terms, accept very tough measures if the crisis is big enough. And the crisis in our environmental crisis is also very big. So maybe there is a lesson there that if the politicians have the courage to do strong things, then the population, perhaps they will be more forgiving and accept more than we think at the outset. In terms of innovation, I guess the research community can do things quicker also than we thought before the pandemic. And there's been the real-time researcher has been very quick. So perhaps there is something in our scientific practices, if I might put it like that, that we should go back and take a hard look at when we have the time.
Thank you. Very interesting. Ole Johan?
Yeah, thank you. Between guessing and knowing, you have science. Together, we have funded 50 projects with dedicated COVID-19 money. So I encourage you in the Corona Commission to talk to all of these 50, at least to look into their abstracts that you can find on the webpage. Look at the previous webinars, because I think, or I know, they have generated a lot of information about the impact. And a comment on the things you alluded to just recently. The first call, it was out there on the web pages just a few days after the first patient being infected in Norway. Within 10 days, we had a 10-day answering time. Within 10 days, we had 125 projects. And of course, none of these researchers have ever worked on COVID before. So in the sense that science is a slow-moving engine, that of course is true, but definitely you can push the pedal to the bottom when needed. So, but still, we can read in the newspaper, I think, almost every day that we still lack knowledge about the effects of the measures we need to take on a national level to keep the pandemic in control. How do you, from your point of view in the Corona Commission, on one hand see that there is a tremendous amount of science, but still we might lack the science that we actually need the most?
Yeah, I guess that what we need the most is up for debate. But in terms of what is written in the media, I see your point. Well, it would certainly be good if we had the authorities had more knowledge about the different type of measures that they use in handling the pandemic, rather than using a whole package the whole time, because then you cannot, as you good researchers know, then it's very, very difficult to distinguish what different measures gives us, what the payoffs are. But you know, this is a practice that social scientists grapple with all the time. There are very few examples in real life that fulfill the requirements for a randomized experiment that you are used to in medicine. Although we should wish that we had more of it. What I think is a hope that I think this is now an acknowledgement that that many make also among politicians. So I think there will be more acceptance going forward for having, for instance, reforms in only parts of the country and parts of the society, so that you can have something that at least resembles a more controlled experiment also in the social sciences. And I think that's one lesson, but I don't have much hope that we will have these clean experiments in in social sciences or social sciences, or in terms of measures for handling the pandemic that we can have in testing out new vaccines or medicines, unfortunately. But we can improve for sure.
Marianne, a few comments from you in the end before we go for a coffee break.
Yes, just a very asking for a very brief comment from Egil before, as a heads up for the next session, which we will talk about digital healthcare and hear more about how this studies on this has been going. And I wonder if you can say very briefly some perspectives on the bridges that needs to be built between the industry, researchers, users, and stakeholders to how we can learn from the experiences that we have made during the last 2 years. And also important for us as well, of course, how can we make sure that the digital transformation does not exclude very vulnerable groups and is user-driven? It's a large question, so
yeah, big question, and I'm no expert there, Marianne. But so I think I am at the risk of repeating myself now. But I think everyone agrees that during the pandemic, the innovations have gone faster, and not necessarily that there are completely new things that we have started using, be that in digital medicine or in other parts of society, but there were technologies and ideas that were there prior to the pandemic. But you know, they have the type of tool that we are using now, just a digital meeting, right? Everyone had to learn that from the first week of the pandemic. Those of us are lucky enough to have office work, and as far as I understand it, digital medicine was also there prior to the pandemic. It was an option, but it wasn't really used at any scale before the pandemic, which again, I guess, just emphasizes that sometimes we need some external force to have a speed up. And what would be good is that perhaps you could be quicker and collaborate more between the research society and the industry, for instance, without having such malign external forces as a pandemic forcing us to. So I mean, that's perhaps a challenge for the Research Council and the Research Society more broadly. Are there any mechanisms there that can foster this collaboration also in times of peace, so to speak? Not a very precise question, Marianne, I'm sorry, but you caught me a little bit.
We'll get more later, I think. Thank you very much for your perspectives.
Thank you very much. And then we'll take, thank you very much to Egil for participating. You'll have to leave us now. It's been a pleasure hearing your reflections and seeing you and getting to know what the new leader of the Corona Commission looks like and sounds like. Thank you very much. And then we'll have a 5 minutes coffee break. So let's be back here at 10:34.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So welcome back to the third session of this seminar. And the first speaker of this session is Anna Hurre. Anna has worked as a management consultant within the healthcare sector in both Sweden and Norway for over 6 years before she joined the product development team at the firm Dignio in 2021. And she will present the project Digital Outpatient Clinic with Remote Care. So please, Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for letting us present our project here today. I would also like to mention that I have Heidi Holmen here as well in the meeting, who is also the postdoc of the project and from Oslo University Hospital. So we will, in this project, we are following hospital outpatients with remote patient monitoring. So I will just start with just give you a very short background of the project. This project has two main goals, and the first one is to do service development. That means that we will develop and validate a new methodology, as well as adapting a technical solution for remote patient monitoring of outpatients. And the second aim of the project is to perform research. And we will compare outpatients on remote patient monitoring with outpatients that continue traditional care paths at these hospitals. And as you see here to the right, there are several project partners involved here. We will use Dignio's platform as a solution in the project, and we will perform the study with patient groups from Oslo University Hospital and the University Hospital of North Norway. The technology that we will use here in the project is the Dignio Connected Care platform. So we will do remote patient monitoring with using integrated sensors that the patients will take measurements at home and report through an app. And we will also use digital questionnaires and use chat functionality and much more to do the remote follow-up for these patients. I would also like to mention that the clinicians, they have a tool at the hospital in which they will monitor these patients with. And at Oslo University Hospital, there are 3 different patient groups that we will follow with this technology. It will be post-operative outpatients as well as chronic pain outpatients from the pain clinic, where focus is medication adjustment. We will also follow epilepsy outpatients, where the focus is to capture change and abnormal symptoms through digital questionnaires. And the third group is outpatients from the lung department with lung fibrosis, where we will do both measurements at home as well as digital questionnaires, etc. From the University Hospital at North Norway, we will follow chemotherapy patients from the oncology department, and I will go a bit more into detail for this specific group very soon here. So the results that we've seen so far. What you see here on the slide is a very simplified process of the treatment path for these chemotherapy patients today, starting with a patient being referred to the hospital, travels to the hospital for the treatments and carries out the chemotherapy. And then they travel back home again for a couple of weeks, and then travel back again to the hospital, performs the chemotherapy, and so it goes on and on until the treatment is either completed or paused. The issue here is that in between those treatments, there is no follow-up of these patients in the weeks in between the treatment. So, and this doesn't have to be an issue. However, quite often these patient gets problems between the treatments, like infections or side effects from the actual treatments, etc. And there is no follow-up. It's up to the patient themselves to actually phone the clinic and to find out what to do. Fever is usually measured at nighttime, which results in hospitalizations more often in the evening than during the day, which is obviously a capacity problem from the hospital side. if the patient calls the clinic, they might be able to take action and go back into the normal pathway again. However, it's quite common that they don't call the clinic and they travel back for their treatment at the hospital with the side effects, and this might result that the treatment takes longer time due to extra preparations, etc. Or in worst case, the treatment must be postponed and the patient needs to travel back home again without having had the chemotherapy at all. And this is obviously very inconvenient for the patient, as well as it's very inconvenient for the hospital, as it's very ineffective. What we would like to do instead in this project is to, when the patient arrives at the and receives the chemotherapy for the first time, they will be given this app, the MyDigno app, and do self-reporting of both measurements that they take at home, as well as reporting through digital questionnaires, etc., so that health personnel can monitor the patients. And as soon as there is a deviation from expected values, the health personnel can take action a lot earlier than normally, and in this way prevents that we end up in the situation that we saw on the previous slide. So earlier detection of any deviating values from normal. So the hypothesis here is that we expect to find more improved outpatient services with more engaged and knowledgeable patients. We also expect to see more efficient use of healthcare resources, as well as more knowledge on how digital outpatient services are used and implemented by patients and healthcare personnel. And how will we measure this? So the research is designed as a pragmatic controlled multi-center study with 2 study arms. So 1 control group, as I mentioned earlier here, and 1 intervention group. And we will look at both quantitative effects as well as perform qualitative interviews with patients and health care personnel in order to study this. So to sum up the results so far, we have, as I just gave you an example of, identified common obstacles through mapping of patient journeys for all these 5 patient groups that we are following in this project. And I just showed you the example from the oncology department. We have also, after a very long process, finally got the risk and vulnerability analysis at the hospitals for use of the technology approved. And we have had very positive feedback from both clinicians and patients participating in the project so far. However, we've also seen that conducting research in the health sector during a pandemic is extremely challenging, as the healthcare personnel already are under pressure. So that was all for me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Anna, for a very interesting presentation. Our next speaker is Mette Røne. Mette is a senior project manager and researcher at SINTEF Digital, and she has a PhD in telematics and extensive experience from research and innovation project in health industry and from the healthcare sector, in particularly primary healthcare. And we very much look forward to hear your presentation, Mette, of the project COVIDig, best practice on use of video and digital surveillance in healthcare. So please.
Thank you. There? Is that okay? You see it in full format?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my name is Mette Røne. I'm from SINTEF Digital. And the agenda is more or less the points, the things pointed out underneath. Some slides about the project, what it is about, and then short into obtained results so far, and future outcomes, and the impact of the result of the pandemic, how it's used actually during the pandemic, which is partly not the scope of the project, because we're going to use it in daily practice. That's in one way the objective. And then something for the future. Yes, best practice for video in digital supervision and remote patient monitoring in healthcare. We wanted to take the advantage of the innovation moment from the corona crisis during April-May 2020. And we already had projects within the same topic, and we saw our partners and supported by SINTEF as well, starting to use these solutions in completely new ways. So the project partner here is Tellyu. It's a vendor of care technologies. It's two municipalities, Kristiansand kommune and Bodø kommune. So that's the project team and SINTEF. Goals for the project is to innovate in the digital solutions and services using video, both in digital supervision and in remote patient monitoring, and to then achieve best practice in healthcare services using video. So it's using the COVID pandemic to escalate the use of camera-based solutions in particular, and then to ease the burden in healthcare. We have the 4 different work packages, so we're looking into best practice from the pandemic and daily use, working processes. How can the video be used in services and working processes in healthcare? What are the functional and the technical requirements when it comes to privacy, security, and cooperation with the patient journal, for example, and other systems? And then to do research to get the benefits and the gains using these kind of solutions. So on the right-hand side, it's technical and service development hand in hand in the project. First, to video in digital supervision. Digital supervision is used for planned supervision, where health personnel use the camera instead of going physically into rooms, for example, at an institution, or doing supervision for people living at home. Event-based supervision is used when it's events that are notified by other sensors, like door, bed movement sensors in houses or at institutions. And then health personnel can quickly check the situation and the context using the camera. And then we have continuous supervision, that is actually carrying out continuous supervision of those patients that really need tight supervision. And then you have the possibility then to supervise many patients at the same time, or elderly people living at home with chronic diseases. In COVID Dig, we are testing out digital supervision at an institution in Kristiansand. It's an institution for rehabilitation of children and young people with disabilities. We have planned supervision and event-based supervision at the institution. The user needs of all the 16 residents at this institution is checked out, and we have adapted technology solutions to those we find to be the first ones to try it out. And so far we have 2 digital supervision cameras installed at the institution. Use of the digital supervision is assessed with state administrator for users not having the consent competence. So further there, we're gonna gain experience on how digital supervision can be used for this user group and at the institution. What kind of routines they have to establish, and to get insight and experience with this specific user group. And then also do research to document the gains and effects of digital supervision when it comes to both users and health professionals, and also in how can I say, in more economic terms when it comes to work resources. Next, we are looking at digital supervision to being a new service from the response center. Telju has a response center that is staffed by Kristiansand municipality. It serves 35 to 50 different municipalities in Norway. It works 24/7, 365 days throughout the year and support municipalities. Very good response time of those, how can I say, acute alarms. So now this is more extending the service they have to also include other type of sensors, more preventive monitoring and those things. So not really acute, but to support the municipality so they don't have to build the same type of response center in each municipality. So the aim is to develop new response center services and new digital solutions in Telju's response platform that is used at the response center. Next, we have it's focusing on video. So video is here used in remote patient monitoring. Remote patient monitoring is something that has been around for years actually, but intensified the last years. It is to prevent and uncover physical and mental health of users living at home that are getting worse. It's making healthcare professionals able to monitor health data of many patients more systematically and implement measures then if needed. The healthcare professionals can spend more time to meet user needs and to prevent preventive healthcare instead of, following up routine work by doing it digitally. So we're especially focusing on the video being an integrated part of the remote patient monitoring solution from Telju. So video is a communication channel together with chat, SMSs, and so forth. When we started off the project in Bodø, we also did a survey that was closed December last year with the use of video in general, because they have been using quite a lot of video, both with patients, users, and internally and externally. So this study is not yet analyzed, but the first question, when did you first use video at work? So it's clearly to see that the pandemic in one way is escalating the use of video, naturally enough, but still. So we're going to analyze this further and use the results of this also to introduce video as a service in those parts of the service areas in Bodø kommune where it's helpful, and also as a part of remote patient monitoring. Video in remote patient monitoring in Bodø or the remote patient monitoring is provided by a specific new unit called Helsehjelpa that has 5 health professionals employed. It follows up every user in Bodø having chronic diseases. It's has also been used for following up COVID-19 in Bodø. So it's more than 310 users that have been followed up by Helsehjelpa instead of the general practitioners or other feberpoliklinikk or other types of health personnel. So experiences are very, very good from the following up. They're reducing their exposure and thus the risk of spreading COVID-19. It's reducing the daily amount of infection control equipment. It's reduced the burden for the GPs, easy monitoring of a large group of patients, early identification of patients, users at risk. Safety and security is experienced by the patients. It's cost efficient for healthcare professionals, and it's a very effective communication portal between patients and healthcare professionals. So it's ongoing still. We're looking into new user groups and use video in particular.
Now, Mette, we need to get to the last point here in this presentation quite soon. Yeah.
So, impact of the result on the pandemic scenario. Video for consultations and meetings, it's been crucial in the pandemic, and we want to make it everyday tool because the health sector, especially in municipal healthcare, will still be in lack of resources. Digital supervision has introduced completely new ways to handle COVID-19. It's easy to establish cohorts within institutions. It's easy to follow up users during the illness, day and night. And you can utilize resources much better, healthcare professionals. Remote patient monitoring is has been efficient in following up COVID-19 patients as well as other patients during the pandemic. So we want to get experience from this work and make everyday services being more efficient, and of course with good experience for users and healthcare professionals. It suits a lot of them, but it doesn't necessarily suit all, but introduce it in the areas where they are useful. Yeah. I have one more, but I can just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mette. Very interesting. Thank you. So the last speaker of this session is Dag Ausen. Dag has extensive experience from SINTEF and both as a business developer and as a research manager at SINTEF Digital. And he now works at Imatis, which is a leading e-health company providing healthcare solutions to hospitals and municipalities. And today he will present his project COSAM, Application for Collaboration in Crisis and Daily Operations in Healthcare Services. So the stage is yours, Dag.
Yeah, thank you and welcome. I'm Dag Ausen, Business Development Manager at Imatis, and I've been in charge of this project for running now for almost 1.5 years. This project don't look at the needs of the patients with COVID or other sort of diseases, but more focus on the need of the healthcare professionals working in the municipality health service to support and follow up both the sort of daily situation and operations, but especially what happened when a crisis occurs and the need for developing new kind of services. The project is established as a sort of a follow-up of the work Imatis did together with Bydel Stovner in Oslo in the very beginning of the corona situation, and where we developed tools to sort of support the fever clinic in that city district. Based on these experiences, they realized the need for improved tools and also the need to base these tools on the tools workers or healthcare personnel use in their daily operations, because it's during a crisis, it's very difficult to adopt new tools and in parallel set up new services and set up new ways of working. So the tools needed should be developed or based on what you use in your daily operations. So the project look on this situation to how to sort of get an experience with both tools for improved quality and efficiency in the healthcare service, and also then understand the need for sort of more crisis management solutions to be used during a pandemic or another type of crisis. We have in the beginning looked get insight of the situation to understand the complexity, and if you look at the municipality healthcare service, it's a very complex service with a lot of stakeholders, both outside the municipality with the hospital, or in Oslo several hospitals and a lot of local doctors, but then also internally in the city with a lot of different actors in total supporting patients in their homes, depending on their status and situation. And that means a lot of coordination between different teams and people. And then when the corona situation has occurred, there were a need for setting up new services. For example, these fever clinics, after some months, they were closed down and there were more established other type of services. During the pandemic, the new kind of services have been established, for example, the vaccination. And these new services should work together with existing teams, and that's quite sort of a complex situation. And what we have seen as a sort of critical need to cope with this is there is a need for an overview of what's happening, and at all sort of parts of the service. And another insight is that without, or what's needed is to clarify responsibilities and roles between people, and then establish tools, because this is the only way you can have efficient follow-up of a large number of people in their homes. So in this sort of first year, we have looked at sort of get insight of how the municipality health service work, especially in the home care situation team. And we have come up with some statements to address the challenge. And the first one is, when everyone is responsible for following up a patient at home, no one is really responsible for that. So the problem is to sort of, you have a set of people following up one person at home, and no one is really sort of taking the full responsibility. So that's a crucial thing to put responsibility or clarify roles inside a service, healthcare service. That part of the situation and what need to be changed. The other statement is that we see there is a lot of templates and best practices and service designs existing. There are no sort of lack of how we should work. It's more a lack of the implementation of all these best practices. And then at the end, there is a lack of overview and also digital tools to support the service. So these are sort of basic findings, and we are not surprised because we have seen this for also before the corona situation. But during the pandemic, the healthcare service has been really stressed, and then you see these effects much more. So what have we learned so far? We are trying to now set up applications supporting different part of the healthcare organization in the city district, both with the home care health service, but also the interdisciplinary teams, assessment team, and also team for mental health and substance abuse. And what we learn is that the difficult part is not to create the applications. The difficult part is to implement and make this sort of a good tools for the workers. And this need to be done in a step-by-step implementation process. So a brief look into some results we see based on 3 applications implemented in the Bydel Gamle Oslo. for teams working in the mental health and substance abuse department. And by using these applications, quite simple or sort of limited applications, not covering everything, but solving some of the challenges there and supporting their work processes. They have been using this for more or less a year now, and we, based on the first results, we see here that we have really improved the quality of the service and the efficiency and also the collaboration and teamwork in the municipality. And so we are quite sure that we have sort of proof of concept, at least, that these kind of applications provide more order and structure and also make sort of it possible to work smarter. Yeah, and then sort of the future outcome, what we try to do now is to move these applications into to implement the Oslo model. That's sort of the best practice of how to do this, implement services in the city districts in Oslo. But we see that there is a lack of tools to make this happen. And what we try to do is to establish good tools for operations and then make them robust so that you easily can adopt a crisis scenario for a pandemic, etc. One example of how iMatis solutions has been used, this is sort of outside the project, but it's sort of based on the same technology. We have solutions in hospitals all over Norway, and Nordland Sykehuset used these kind of solutions in front of the pandemic. And as a result of that, they were able to quickly implement a COVID response. So this is a sort of, here we have some research results that document effects, and we are providing sort of, or foreseeing that we will document same effects in the Oslo case. So by that, I close down.
Great. So thank you to all three speakers. It has been very inspiring to hear your experiences of the possibilities that is in digital home care and remote care of patients. And it's also very interesting to see how the innovation has really accelerated during the pandemic. And it's also quite easy to see how this can help us to be prepared for the future, to add to our resilience. So earlier today, Egil Madsen gave some reflections regarding the implementation of such digital transformations. And I wonder if you could give some brief reflections on that as well. What are the key issues that need to be solved to enable us to enable this transition, to get it from these pilots to a broad implementation? And I wonder, Mette, if you can start with your perspective, especially when it comes to the municipalities and what are needed from them. They are a very important and a healthcare provider. So do you have any reflections on that?
Yes. Key issue. I mean, they have an enormous need for digital support in every kind of task they're doing. I think they have less digital solutions, much less than in hospitals, for example. So in one way, it from an outside perspective, at least, it's in one way easier to implement new technology, because it's not a lot of existing technologies to adapt to. But I think the most important takeaway from all these pilots is that the health professionals themselves have to be involved in introducing, in implementing these technologies. And they have to be the ones that actually both feel and experience the need and the gain they are getting from these technologies, because in one way you can introduce one product, but but it's about the service. So in one way, digital supervision, for example, it might be implemented in every room in an institution, but it doesn't really help before you're using it as an integrated part of the how can I say, more soft services from health personnel themselves. And I think that's very important in the municipalities. Very often it's introduced being something else, that you have the velferdsteknologi, the care technologies, and the services combined with those. But we're working to get it to be an integrated part of the service that the municipality is offering to the inhabitants. And I think often, if you go to the studies, to the pilot studies where they're really trying out things, it's some persons being very, very eager to do it, and they succeed in doing it. It gives benefits, but they don't manage, or might be they don't even try to get everyone in the municipality involved in it. So like recruiting to a pilot, recruiting users, that's very important, and they put effort into it. But you have to put effort into the recruitment when this is going to be a service. That means another department of the municipality that are considering what kind of services those that are applying for services are needing. So, and I think the challenge there is that those innovation projects, they become a bit huge. You have to make them huge. I mean, broad in the sense that they have to incorporate a lot of people in the organization. And I think that's in one way where the challenge is.
Okay. Dag, would you like to add something to Mette's perspective?
Yeah, one comment is that, well, we also see that there is a lack of understanding in the management of how to sort of implement this kind of digital solutions. This digital transformation need to be owned by management and sort of supported and follow up. It's more, often we see that, well, you have a management decision and then you think where everything is fixed, but you really need to work hard for this during 1 or 2 or 3 years to get the outcome and the benefits and the results. And the management tends to sort of forget this, and then the results just go away, I will say. So it's a very hard work to implement and really make a digital transformation happen. That's sort of the lack, I see as a sort of lack of understanding of this in the municipalities.
Okay. So Anna, your project takes place in the hospitals. So from your perspective, do you have any further comments?
Well, yes, from a hospital perspective, I think it's important at some stage that we stop just doing small pilots, but also allow us to scale up, because it's a risk. I mean, obviously, it's a very good start to do the small pilots in order to gain the knowledge and to try out something in small scale and learn when you go along. But to really realize the potential and the benefits, we need to bring it up to scale. Otherwise, there's a risk that when we just do small things and pilots, that it will at least come across as taking more resources than it actually managed to free the capacity. Yeah, I think that's an important aspect as well.
Yeah, so I guess a key term is user-driven here, both from the health professionals and also, of course, from the users. And just one last question, I think, before we need to end this session is, how can we make sure that, I was mentioning this earlier as well, how can we make sure that all vulnerable groups, those with low digital competence, etc., are not excluded in this transformation? And how can we ensure this? Do you have any comments on that, Dag?
I'm not sure if we can ensure it, but,
No, but
at least we need to address it and remember that the digital solution is not the only solution. But then, of course, you need to sort of work hard to get everyone on board on this journey, and that's I think is a sort of a long process. But of course, if you come up with tools that really makes a difference for the working condition, then it's much easier, both for the patient but also for the sort of healthcare professionals. Because if they get better tools and sort of really see the benefits, then it's much easier to also adopt and learn and yeah.
Yeah. Very brief last comment, maybe Mette, from you on this.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity because it's possible to make those solutions very user-friendly and very easy to use. But I think on the other hand, you won't find one solution that suits everyone. So it's important that it's possible to adapt it, make it easier for some users and more complicated for others. But last but not least, I think if you manage to address like a percentage, 80% in this way, then you will have resources in one way to follow up those patients that might not be able to use digital solutions in a better way as well, because then you have more, how can I say, not free time, but you have more time to follow up those few. So I mean, if you can't follow up all, it's no reason for not trying to follow up a lot of them.
No, of course. Yeah. So just 2 sentences from you in the end, Anna, before we close this.
Yes, so just adding to what they just said, Mette and Dag, I also think it's very important to involve the patient in the development processes for the technology to make sure that we actually develop something that they can use.
Well, thank you very much for your input and perspectives and your excellent presentations.
Thank you, Marianne. This concludes the plenary sessions, and now it's time for the meet the speaker session or the parallel sessions. Until now, we have been sitting quietly and listening. In the parallel sessions, I encourage you all to be active. Have your camera on, ask questions, say if you can help, or you might even ask for help yourself. You might be surprised.
So, on behalf of the Research Council of Norway, Trond Mohn Foundation, and the Norwegian Cancer Society, thank you all for participating. There will be an evaluation form sent out shortly, and please help us to improve the next seminar in the series by answering this. Best of luck with the parallel sessions, and we hope to see you back for the 5th webinar. That's planned for March 21st. And now please choose your parallel session in the Meet the Speakers icon on top of your screen. Thank you very much.